Hello everyone, welcome to Zero Labs. Today is Friday, November 28th, 2014. I'm Mark Brash, your host, and with this video, I hope to present to you the single, most concise, most accurate, most definitive resource on making ionic silver and colloidal silver available on YouTube anywhere. So as you may have noticed, my voice is not quite what it usually is. I'm fighting a little bit of a head cold. I'm hoping not to give it to anyone else, and I'm hoping to nip it in the bud a little bit with some of my emergency prepared colloidal silver. But one of the things that I have begun to learn quite a bit is that there is quite a bit of BS regarding colloidal silver and ionic silver and the differences between the two and when they're used. Some of the information in one place is good, some of the information in another place is good, but it seems nobody has the complete story. But I did find a forum. I'm going to post a link down below in the description. It is this Colloidal Gold, Colloidal Silver forum, and I found a lot of very useful information there from a lot of credible sources, people who know what they're talking about, people with degrees in chemistry, and are very, very up to speed with what it takes to make the two products. What I've learned is that there is a lot of electrical engineering involved. Faraday's law of electrolysis. There is a lot of chemistry involved. And it's not as simple as sticking two wires in distilled water. In fact, putting two wires in distilled water is probably the one thing that you can do that will make it most difficult for you to produce a consistent product. I learned that adding an electrolyte to the solution to increase the conductivity to an acceptable range where you can actually decrease the amount of time it takes to produce colloidal silver is acceptable. Not only is it acceptable, it's preferred, because that way you can easily calculate how much silver you are dissolving into your solution, and from that derive a parts per million figure, an accurate parts per million figure. So let's start. What are we going to need? The first thing you're going to need, and I realize there are a lot of places in a lot of third world countries that may not have access to this, so I'm going to count on those of you who are not in third world countries, who are in more developed nations, or who may have access to better resources, to make the colloidal silver for those people who can't make it for themselves. But you are going to need a simple digital multimeter like this. Harbor Freight gives these away for free every now and then. I paid $1 for this. The regular price is $7.99. It's basically a throwaway, but it's half decent, and it does the job for what you need it to do. You need a quart jar, a clean glass quart jar, 1 liter or 32 ounces, pretty much the same. All right. I've got a little mason jar, a little 6-ounce mason jar that I'm going to be using for mixing up some of the preparations that are used in the chemical process of making consistent colloidal silver. I have a little plastic shot glass that I have calibrated on the edge as in 0.75 and 1 ounce markings here, using a 30 milliliter syringe, which is approximately 1 ounce as well. I went to my local drugstore, picked up 2 bottles of saline solution, and I'm basically going to take the top off of this, remove the pickup tube that runs to the bottom, and discard the product because I don't want the saline solution in here. I'm going to use these as dropper bottles for my chemicals in processing the colloidal silver. Now, before you get too afraid of my use of the word chemicals, I'm talking about food safe products. Okay, one of those food safe products is light corn syrup. This is in the United States, Caro, and I believe in the UK it's called Golden something. You're of course going to need distilled water, and I'm beginning to revise my position on the use of tap water or filtered water. You really do want to start with distilled water, preferably. This is less than a gallon of regular spring water that you buy at a grocery market, and I hope that those of you who have access to distilled water will use it to help others who may not have access to distilled water. I have my electrode with my holder, which is a barrier strip, and I'm now using 3 9-volt batteries to produce a total of 27 volts. There's a very good reason for that, and I will show you what that is in just a minute. I'm also using 2 wire electrodes, which are silver wire electrodes, 0.999. You don't need to buy 0.9999 or 4 nines because chemically any person who can tell you what the purity of silver is will tell you that they cannot detect the difference. Don't spend the extra money for someone who's selling something with that extra 4th 9 on the end. Not worth it. Just buy 0.999 silver wire. And you may have also noticed that I put a little toggle switch on my barrier strip here. This is so that I can reverse polarity every time I run a batch. I'm not going to be flipping the switch back and forth, reversing polarity in between batches, but I may flip the polarity every other batch so that I keep the wear and tear on my 2 electrodes equal. All right, and the last thing you're going to need is this very suspicious looking white powder. This is actually baking soda that's been baked. Call it a twice baked soda. The reason you bake it is to take the sodium bicarbonate and convert it into sodium carbonate. The way you do that is you put this in a toaster oven for about an hour to an hour and a half at 400 to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly 205 degrees centigrade, and allow it to bake. And what that does is it reduces the bicarb to carb, releases the carbon dioxide and the moisture in the sodium bicarbonate, and produces sodium carbonate. This will be our electrolyte for the process and to increase the conductivity of our water cell so that we can adjust it using the digital multimeter and calculating a measured process that way. All right, to begin, I've got my 2.5 ounce bottles of saline solution. I've already taken a Sharpie and marked this one E-light for electrolyte and this one RA for reducing agent. We'll be using these at different stages of the process. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the nipple, pop it off, and there's the pickup tube on the bottom. I'm simply going to take the pickup tube off, throw it away, dump out the contents, clean out the bottle, and then simply use this as a dropper bottle. Like that. My 2 bottles have now been thoroughly cleaned and rinsed with distilled water. I think we can presume cleanliness to start with because these were sterile solutions to begin with. So all they really needed was multiple rinsings with distilled water. So we now have clean vessels. And what I'm going to do now is first mix up my reducing agent. I want to mix up about 2 ounces of reducing agent. So I'm going to, actually I want to mix up about 1.5 ounces because each of these bottles is 1.5 ounces. So I'll fill this to 0.75 ounces. And just pour this into my mixing jar. And take my light corn syrup. This is brand new. My wife bought it for me today, so I haven't yet taken off the seal. The reason we're using light corn syrup is because this is a very simple sugar, primarily glucose and fructose, mostly glucose, with very few impurities. Even though it says it has vanilla in it, it's not going to harm you, and it won't hinder the process any. Okay, I'll pour that, and the reason we're mixing at 50-50 is to simply dilute it enough to be dispensable from an eyedropper bottle. Now I use my plastic stirrer thingy and just stir it until it's completely dissolved, and I'll pour it into my dispenser. And that's it. I've now made my proprietary, very expensive, if you want to buy it from Silver Lungs, reducing agent. I'll just take my my reducing agent and pour it into my bottle. Et voila! I have 1.5 ounces of reducing agent. We'll dispense this drop by drop. It's approximately 20 drops per milliliter of dispensed product. Now I just need to clean out my measuring cup again. I might even lick it clean, and and then we'll mix up the electrolyte. I've now thoroughly rinsed my shot glass and my mixing jar with distilled water, cleaned it out, wiped it out, and we're going to mix up the electrolyte. The electrolyte for 1 molar concentration of sodium carbonate is 1 teaspoon per 2 fluid ounces of electrolyte. So I have a measuring teaspoon. This is one level teaspoon, and I'll just scoop some up here. Or maybe it'll be safer to dump it in. I don't know. Let's find out if I can do this without spilling. Incidentally, when you convert baking soda to sodium bicarbonate to sodium carbonate, what you end up with is a compound that is much less powdery in nature and more granular in nature, kind of like a salt. Alright, so there's my 1 level teaspoon. Put that in the jar, and to this I will add 2 ounces of distilled water, mix and put it into my dispensing dropper bottle. And air bubbles will settle out of this and rise to the surface, so I don't have to wait for it now. I can just pour this into my dispenser bottle. The saline solution bottle was 1.5 ounces. That left some room for air to give you the ability to squeeze the bottle and push out some air with the liquid that would create the atomized spray. I don't need that. I'm just using it as a dropper bottle, so it holds 2 ounces. And there are my chemicals that I'll be using in the process of making colloidal silver. Now, to bring some electrical engineering into the project, Faraday's law of electrolysis and electroplating shows that if you pass 15 milliamps through your electrodes, you will release into solution 1 milligram of ionic silver every minute. So if I run 15 milliamps through a pair of electrodes in 1 liter of water, I will end up with an ionic silver solution that is 1 part per million concentration. If I want 20 parts per million concentration, I would run that 15 milliamps for 20 minutes. Very simple math. However, I still think that 15 milliamps is too much, especially for thin electrodes like this. You can run 15 milliamps through a silver anode if you were using like a silver bullion piece. But for thin wires like this, we want to keep it under 6 milliamps. I'm shooting for 5. So if I run 5 milliamps through my electrodes, I'm going to release 20 milligrams of silver in an hour. So if I want 20 parts per million, I run this device at 5 milliamps current draw for 1 hour. And using that formula, I can very closely calculate exactly what my parts per million concentration is. The TDS meters that are used to measure the concentration of silver in solution are completely bogus. They do not measure silver in solution, not ionic, not colloidal. You cannot rely on those. All they measure is the resistance of the water. We're going to be playing with the resistance of the water, but that has no bearing on how much silver you've actually dissolved in solution. Looking at this diagram, I'm going to be using 3 9-volt batteries, which are 27 volts. If I want 5 milliamps of current to flow through my electrodes in the solution, I need a total resistance on my 27 volts of 5.4 K, or 5,400 ohms. The other part of the equation that you need to keep in mind is not only do you need current flowing through the electrolyte, but you also need a voltage potential across the electrodes. And you need that voltage potential to be above 10 volts to keep the electrodes clean and to keep the process flowing smoothly. I'm shooting for 1/2 of my total available power. I'm shooting for 1/2 of 27 volts, or 13.5 volts. If I want to reduce my voltage by 1/2, I simply create a resistance series network with 2 equal value resistors. Now I know that I want both of these resistors to equal 5.4 K, so each of the resistors in a 2 resistor series network is 2.7 K. Therefore, the resistor that I'm going to be using in place of the 33 K resistor that I was using before, mistake, I admit it, mistake, please scrub that, 2.7 K for your resistor in series, and you want the concentration of your electrolyte in the solution to give you another equivalent 2.7 K, so that you end up with 5 milliamps of current flowing through the whole circuit and allowing you to put a stopwatch or a clock on the process so that you can accurately reproduce quality batches of ionic silver and later convert into colloidal silver. Okay, so the 2.7 K resistor is now in place. I do admit that this does preclude making the homebrew resistor that I showed you in a previous video using a pencil lead and rubbing it on a piece of cardboard. Unless you can accurately use your digital multimeter to come up with 2.7 K, I don't see that you would. I don't see where that would be a viable solution in this case, unfortunately. So you will need to pick up that value if you are to know exactly what concentration of colloidal silver you are producing. It is now time to take some of my distilled water and clean out my quart jar here. You can see it is a very mild pale yellow. I probably only have 1 or 2 parts per million of colloidal silver in here, and I'll be dumping this out and starting over, cleaning it out, putting distilled water, and setting my electrodes in it, and then adjusting my voltage. I'll show you in just a moment. I'm now ready to start the batch, so I'm going to take my steam distilled water, put it in the jar, which has been cleaned, swabbed, and rinsed with distilled water to make sure that it is perfectly clean. All right. Just like that. Again, very close to 1 liter, so. And I'm going to put my electrodes in the water first. And if my theory is correct, I should still have 27 volts or very close to that across my electrodes, because very little current should be flowing and there should be almost no voltage drop on the resistor. Voltage drop on the resistor indicates that current is flowing. And ultimately, I want the same voltage across the resistor as I have on the electrodes in the solution. So right now, I'm on the 200 volt scale, 25.6 volts across the electrodes, which is a lot, and I have 1.5 volts across the resistor. Now it's time to add electrolyte to increase the amount of current being drawn so that my end result is approximately 13 volts across the resistor. I'm going to agitate the water, just stir it up a little bit so that when I add the electrolyte it mixes, and you see the voltage drop when I do that. Okay. This is the first time I'm doing this, so I'm a little nervous. Alright, so that looked like about 3 drops. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to start with 10 drops. And right away you see the voltage across my resistor start to increase. And I've already got now quite a bit of current flowing. So much so that at this point I'm going to stop the process and I'm going to spread my electrodes apart a little bit so that I can get that closer to the range that I'm shooting for. Alright, so like I showed you earlier, I'm just going to take my hand and move these apart. Keep them parallel, but move them apart. Being careful not to touch where they are immersed in the solution. And we'll try this again. And getting closer. I'm going to move them apart a little more. This is actually a lot farther apart than I expected they would need to be. Again, this is a learning process for me as well. Perfect. Exactly what I was looking for. So with this amount of voltage being dropped across my 2.7K resistor, I know that there is 5 milliamps of current flowing through the solution. And with that much current in 1 liter, I will have 20 parts per million in 60 minutes. I may have to adjust my spacing a little bit throughout the process, I'm not sure. But I will keep an eye on it, and see you in 60 minutes. I should also point out to you that if you look closely, you'll see that I have my aquarium pump bubbler in the background, and I'm literally just releasing 1 bubble every second or so, just enough to keep the water circulating, but not enough to create turbulence or to really aerate the water, because aeration of the water is not the goal. The goal is to dissolve silver in the water. not air. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see this, but the anode, which is what the silver is dissolving off of in solution, is the electrode on your left. And I'm shining a bright 5-watt LED flashlight, and at the very bottom you can see a trail of the ionic silver flowing away from the very tip. And the reason you see a concentration at the tip is because that's where electrons concentrate on sharp objects, and I may end up in the end rounding off the tips of these electrodes as best I can and polishing them up so that they're nice and rounded. But every once in a while you can catch a wave of ionic silver flowing away from the anode. I'll let the camera run a little bit. I see a small wisp in between the two electrodes. Right, there we go. There's a nice little wisp. Get an idea. And that literally is flowing away from the anode rod all the way up the length of the rod. And I better stop talking now because I'm about to lose my voice, it sounds like. And we're back. It has been close to an hour, and you see that my voltage has crept up a little bit across the dropping resistor, meaning the voltage has sagged a little bit across the electrodes, but that is still well within the plus or minus 10% that I've set as a tolerance for myself. And my overall spacing ended up about 1 3/4 inches apart on the electrodes. So we're going to stop the process right here. For those of you who've been listening, I do have my rocket stove running in the background, and we're going to use that now to reduce our ionic silver into colloidal silver using the reducing agent. One thing I do want you to pay attention to right now, let me just pop this off of here, get that out. I'm going to take a white piece of paper, and I'm not going to move my camera tripod. Take a white piece of paper, and I'm going to set it behind. I want you to take note of the color that you see right now. It is actually already a slight pale yellow. So I do have some colloids in there, but right now we're going to put this over on the rocket stove. The rocket stove right now is running at last measurement 503 degrees on the top of the stove. So what I've done is I've got a tuna fish can with some water. I'm going to set this on top of the rocket stove so that the only heat that we get is the boiling water against the bottom of the jar, so that we don't crack the jar, because I'm afraid if I just set this directly on the stove, it will crack. Actually, this might be a good place to view the whole process from. All right. So I'm going to set this on top. And hope it doesn't break under the heat. And yes, indeed, we're at 460 degrees off center. I've already dropped the temperature of the center a little bit. But we're starting the process. There is your reference. There we go. Yep, there's your reference. Okay. And I wish I could hang this back here so that we could do a time lapse. Well, we'll do a before and after. target temperature is 140 degrees Fahrenheit minimum. I'll be shooting for about 180. Unless I stop to see any coloration change. And I have yet to see it. I'm presupposing that there will be a color change. This is my first time. So, like all things, you just never know. It might help if I put the reducing agent in. What do you think? Oh, and I'm still recording. All right. Well, that's fine. And now, for your consideration. There is our first batch of true colloidal silver. A deep golden color. I expect that it may continue to deepen in color with time, but it will eventually slow down. The purpose of the reducing agent not only is to accelerate the process, but also to keep it as a colloid after it has cooled down. The purpose of the electrolyte is simply to give us a known measure of current. The electrolyte that we've put in there is something that you eat every single day in much larger quantities than we put into this jar right here. It is baking soda turned into washing soda. It is sodium bicarbonate turned into sodium carbonate simply by applying heat. Notice how crystal clear it is? That is a very high quality batch. Also to note, colloidal silver has no taste. The clear ionic silver has a very heavy metallic taste to it. So when you take a taste of the colloidal silver, it should be tasteless. Even though it's not colorless, it should be tasteless. And that, boys and girls, is the definitive guide on how to make true ionic silver and then turn it into true colloidal silver. Interestingly to note, my electrode spacing ended up being exactly 1.5 inches apart between the electrodes, with 3 3/4 inches submerged in the solution. That gave me the optimum current that I was looking for, the optimum voltages, and the optimum product. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this series. As always, please rate, share, comment, and subscribe. And peace, everyone. It's true. No taste at all. Wow. And that, boys and girls, is the definitive guide to making ionic silver and turning it into true colloidal silver. Try again. And that, boys and girls, is the true, definitive guide on how to make ionic silver and turn it into colloidal silver in a